This is Ashley Newby, and you're listening to the Black Studies Podcast, a Mellon Grant sponsored series of conversations examining the history of the field. Our conversations engage with a wide range of activists and scholars, senior figures in the field, late doctoral students, cultural workers, political organizers, and everyone in between in order to explore the cultural and political meaning of Black studies as an area of inquiry and its critical methods. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Black Studies Podcast. Today, we are talking with Walidah Imarisha, Director of the Center for Black Studies and Associate Professor in the Black Studies Department at Portland State University. She is an educator and a writer, the co-editor of two anthologies, Octavia's Brood, science fiction stories from social justice movements, and Another World is Possible. She is also the author of Angels with Dirty Faces, 3 stories of crime, prison, and redemption, which won a 2017 Oregon Book Award. She spent 6 years with the Oregon Humanities Conversation Project as a public scholar facilitating programs across the state about Oregon Black history and other topics. In 2015, she received a Tiptree Fellowship for her science fiction writing. Currently, she has work centered her work with the Center for Black Studies and the Black Studies Department includes revisions to the Black Studies certificate that has resulted in increased accessibility to the program, including offering it to incarcerated students, and the curation of an archive in the PSU Library's special collection on the Oregon Black Pioneers Historic Photograph Collection, rooted in photo albums of a Black family from the mid-20th century found under the stairs by current homeowners. So welcome, Walidah.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
It's so great to get to talk to you. We got to work at Stanford together, but then you left, and I'm sad. But ultimately, yeah. So we had some conversations, but I know that there's so much that you can say, particularly about Black studies and all the different ways and genres and modalities that you have engaged it. So let's start with how you got into Black studies.
Yeah, I think I first got into Black studies really in high school. I had grown up on military bases in other countries, which, military bases are disproportionately Black and brown because that is who is recruited disproportionately into the military. So coming out, we came to a small rural Oregon town that was overwhelmingly white. And I was like, what is happening? What is going on here? At that time, there was a lot of attacks happening on students of color and Black students, a lot of disproportionate punishment happening for the students of color who defended themselves versus the white students who were attacking. And at that time, I really didn't understand why they would do that. I didn't understand why someone would hurt people they don't even know. And I sort of went on a journey to try and find that. And I was lucky to find Leron Bennett's Before the Mayflower and to find Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States and Paula Gidding's Where and When I Enter, and really immersing myself in that history and seeing very clearly how that history, is not really history. As I always say, it's a living legacy with us. And so I feel like that really put me on the course I'm on now. And then while I was still in high school, I got to hear Dr. Daryl Milner, who is one of the preeminent historians on the Black experience in the West, give a presentation about Oregon Black history. And that really changed the course of my life because I actually decided to go to Portland State University because that's where Dr. Milner taught and really wanted to be part of the legacy of protecting this history that is really community-based and community-centered because so many of these historic institutions and academic ones didn't care about that history. So it has been held and preserved by the community, and I wanted to be part of that however I could.
That's one, I didn't know that much. That was super interesting. But thinking about like the impact that just attending that talk had, like it shaped where you went and what you did with your life. And it's a beautiful representation and example of what Black studies does.
Mhm.
So you kind of touched on it a little bit, but continuing in that vein, what keeps you committed to the field?
Oh, I mean, I think, first, Black studies is such a quantum field. It is everything all at once, all the time. And I think that that is actually the natural way that we exist. I think, the different academic departments, different artistic genres, all of those are created to sort of carve up who we are, the world around us. And then we have to try and fit it back together when it was already together in the beginning. And so I feel like Black Studies is really a space that allows all of us to live in that holistic existence of reality. And, I think that Black studies, I have seen it be incredibly important and change the lives of so many by learning that history, by learning a pedagogy that externalizes the white supremacy that we all live in and allows everyone, but especially folks of color, to be able to center the resistance of Black people and the community building rather than what has been done to us. So, it's that. I guess I should have obviously said number one, the students. But, I love the Black Studies students at Portland State. I think that they are some of the most passionate, engaged students I've encountered. I love my students at Oregon State Penitentiary, where we're teaching Black Studies now. They are the most voracious, engaged students I have ever seen in my life. And I love my colleagues. It is such a place of support and care. We're under-resourced and, always doing too much, but it's very different. I've been in different departments, and it's a very different feel to know that everyone there is willing to give whatever they have, support however they can, pitch in, versus folks being like, well, I got my own thing going on, so you got to figure that out.
Yeah, that the under-resourced aspect, as well as like the way that the departmental culture can interact with that, is definitely a huge, it is an interesting point to think about in different spaces and the way that manifests and how that bleeds over into classroom and classroom opportunities for students and what that can look like. So since you mentioned your work with incarcerated students, you want to, so one, I have a question, right, about how Black Studies informs your teaching, but also like knowing that you have both this Black Studies certificate that you are offering to incarcerated students, but also like the Deep Space Nine class that you taught, like all of the amazing, cool things that you do in classrooms. I would like to hear a little bit more about your specific pedagogy and like how that informs your teaching and what you do in the classroom.
Yeah, I mean, I came to academia in a very non-traditional manner. I never originally imagined I would teach at a college. I taught a lot of poetry workshops and poetry classes in community and public schools, but my college education was very unpleasant. And if it hadn't been for Portland State University's Black Studies department, I wouldn't have graduated because all of my other classes were white. The other history classes I took, by and large, there were a couple shining examples and exceptions, but most of them, were soul crushing because they were just centered on whiteness. And when I tried to bring in different perspectives, it was really silenced, marginalized, or punished. And so I would have dropped out from college if I didn't have the Black Studies department, which at that time didn't have a major. We do now, yay! But I'm old enough that we did not have a major back then. But just being able to go into those educational spaces and feel like I could breathe was so important to me. And it is a trip sometimes walking on the campus at Portland State and seeing ghosts of myself at 17, 18, 20 on that campus. And, I left and did a ton of things and was like, I'm never coming back, Portland. And then life life lifed on me. And I ended up back there and really with my dream job, because I feel like I understand the students at Portland State, given my history, my deep connection. And I understand how important the Black Studies department there is everywhere, but especially there. And want to be part of that legacy of ensuring that, it celebrated 50 years a few years ago. Let's celebrate 50 more in the future. So I feel like that journey for me really epitomizes Black Studies, that I didn't, and of course, again, it's quantum. There's a million different entry points into Black Studies. But for me, I really came to it through community. I came to it through studying on my own, especially the Black Panther Party and different Black radical theorists, and seeing that this was a space that really, its roots were so deeply embedded in the community. And that's what was important to me. Part of why I hated college was that it was disconnected from the world and reality. I'm like, why are we talking about this if you're not going to connect it and make it important and make it relevant? So I feel like in Black Studies, making it relevant and connecting it to the world is as simple as breathing.
Yeah, I think that's probably, particularly now, and not necessarily more so than in the past, but like now is the moment that we're living in. There's so many connections that can be made and should be made. And it is integral for us to be able to demonstrate that for students who might not. So do you want to speak a little bit specifically about the Black Studies certificate and like how that process of revising it to make the credit number less and therefore be able to offer it to more groups of students happens?
Yeah, and I think that's a great segue, because it is part of that idea of making it accessible, making it useful. And, the Black Studies certificate before, it had a lot more credits. It actually, in comparing it to some departments, it had more credits needed than a minor in another department. And we were like, well, that's not right. But it also had a lot of very specific requirements that had to be taken. Portland State University is a non-traditional university. So, we are not usually getting, obviously I went there as a first-time student, as a teenager, but, I think most of our folks are, they're working, they've got kids, they've got a lot going on, they're going to school part-time or full-time, and they're going with a purpose. I want this because I want to do these things with it. And I love that, because again, I'm like, great, let's get our hands in the dirt and let's do this. So I think for us, removing those barriers and making it more accessible to more people so that they could, even if they're not going to be Black Studies majors, they can walk away with this certificate that allows their study and expertise in this area to be recognized. Mm-hmm. And it's actually in the process, I think it's this fall, it's going to be a standalone certificate. So folks will receive it and you don't have to even be enrolled. You can just get the certificate and go out and use it in the world. So, we absolutely shifted it for our on-campus students, but my push for shifting it was definitely for our incarcerated students. We started a program with another program at Portland State called the Higher Education in Prison program. We started it a couple years ago, teaching at a specific prison, Oregon State Penitentiary, that I had long connections with. I'd worked with incarcerated leaders there for over a decade. And they had asked many times for Black Studies classes, history classes. And so it was really just one of my dreams to be able to start a Black Studies program in a prison, because I have been doing that work the vast majority of my life, working on prison justice, prison education, and knowing that if we're not talking about incarcerated people, we're not talking about the whole of our Black community. And that, prisons are meant to divide us, and we have to find ways to challenge that. So, again, I think the Black Studies certificate was about making sure that the students in the class can see they're working towards a goal, and also that, for many of them, they never went to college and they never imagined going to college, even though they are brilliant and dedicated and incredible scholars and, so passionate about the material. So, we had a ceremony. All of the students except one who wasn't able to complete one class received their Black Studies certificate. And they did it in front of, over 100 people, most of them in their incarcerated community. And it was just so beautiful to get to see them celebrated for the work that they had done and celebrated for the academic work they had done, which, again, many of them never even imagined that to be an option because of the educational racism they had already experienced.
That is one amazing. And I think that hopefully, right, this can serve as a blueprint where this can happen other places, because that opportunity should be available in multiple spaces. Like education in prison in general should be available, but you should also be able to study the things that you want to study and the things that are relevant and important to your life, for sure. So that is phenomenal. And that speaks to one type of that community engaged learning that Black Studies is rooted in. I know that the other project, the archive with the photographs, is another example of that. So would you like to speak a little bit about that as well?
Yeah, that was such a fun project and such a great learning experience for me. We worked with a community organization, Oregon Black Pioneers, which preserves, if the name is pretty self-explanatory, preserves not just that period of time, but Black history in general. And they were gifted, as you said in the intro, multiple photo albums of a family that lived in a house in North Portland, the historic Black community, that had probably been there for 20 years or more under the stairs. And the new owners found it and didn't know how to get it to the family. And so, shared it with Oregon Black Pioneers. And they had wanted to find a way to preserve that and to share it in a broader way. So they had approached Black Studies and the Center for Black Studies. And so we worked with the library archivists to create a class for students so that they learned how to archive the photos, how to scan them in, how to write the descriptions, how to tag them, all of those different pieces, but also learning about that history. And it ended with them writing sort of reflective research papers that were printed in the Oregon Historical Quarterly, and they gave a presentation. So it was, when we first devised it, I was like, we're doing a lot. As we talked about beforehand, we're on the quarter system. So I'm like, this is 10 weeks, y'all. We're doing a lot. But the students just dove into it, and they finished. We were like, well, we're probably not going to get through all of the albums. That's fine. They finished those albums well ahead of time. We're like, oh, and they're like, what else? What are we going to do now? We're like, oh, I guess we can do more work on tagging and organizing than we thought we could. That's great. But it's such an important archive, because it's one family's story over 40 years. So you get to see all of these shifts, but it's representative of these pieces of Black history. The Great Migration, the World War II. They came to Oregon to work in the shipyards for World War II, and the movement after that into North Portland, into the Black community, and it is a way of showing that shows as well the joy and the beauty and the connections and community made, rather than focusing and entering in through what was done to us. We know, and the students obviously learned that larger context, but being able to see, folks dressed up in their Sunday best, smiling at the camera in front of their old 1950s car, that's very different than saying in the aftermath of World War II, blah, blah, blah. And so I think that I'm really happy that that exists. And I was really honored to be able to go through those photos because, I do talk about the history in such a broad way. It's really beautiful to be able to hold up photos and be like, I know where that is. And look at these kids playing basketball on the corner. And, oh my gosh, that's what, that looked like before it was torn down. And it was a wonderful experience.
That sounds phenomenal. and the taking something like a photo album and being able to not just use that as a starting off, as a way of entering, right? Like you said, the quantum entry point, like as a way of entering, but also as a way of really like the fact that the students did that, the skills that they were able to gain, and the way that they're able to think about archives in a different way, right? So often archives are not made by or by Black people or with the humanity of Black people being acknowledged. And to be able to do that is a really beautiful representation of what's possible when you take a Black studies perspective.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, of course, I've got to ask about the Deep Space Nine class.
My triumphant return to Stanford. And I'm so glad you were there for the time that I was there, because there was a lot, and it was wonderful to be able to share that space and community with you. So as you know, Dr. Adam Banks, who runs the program of writing and rhetoric, he is brilliant and wonderful, and is also a huge Star Trek nerd, and specifically Star Trek Deep Space Nine nerd, which I was so overjoyed about because that is my favorite show. And so many folks either haven't seen it, or if they're Star Trek nerds, don't like it. I'm like, I could talk a whole podcast episode about why that is, but I will not. I will not go.
You and Adam are the entire reason that I watched it.
Yeah.
I rewatch it all the time. So y'all converted me.
That makes me so happy. That's so wonderful. Oh, I'm like, you bring in your brilliant mind to DS9. Yes, I love it. So, Adam and I had talked about doing a class, and he was like, I'd love to do a class someday. I'm like, oh my God, sign me up. I'm there 100%. I'll walk down from Portland if I have to. And it's, it's been years since then. So every now and then we'd mention it, and I'm like, yeah, that would be lovely. And then I get a very cryptic text from Adam one day, and he's like, get ready. And turns out, the class was happening. And the added surreal part of it was that he got Sirach Lofton, who plays Jake Sisko on the show, to be part of the teaching team for the class. And he was like, you need to sit, you need to be ready. You need to be ready for what I'm about to say. And I was like, okay, what could it be? And I was not ready. But it was such an incredible experience for so many reasons. I feel like, again, just getting to nerd out about Deep Space Nine for 3 hours a week has been my dream. But I think also seeing, students who the vast majority of them had never even heard of it, because most of them were not born when it started, which is brutal to, I was like, oh. But, I think that it was really powerful to see them come to this show, and for them to see so much of use within it, so many entry points to having such important conversations, so relevant, as you said before, to the times we are in now. It is still extremely relevant politically, and the conversations that were happening, and the questions and the contradictions and the unanswered qualities of it are still very, very relevant. So it was wonderful to see the students exploring that and having those kinds of conversations where at the end of the day, sometimes there's not a clear answer. It's not as easy as this was good and this was bad. It was, okay, we're going to have to hold these these complexities and get and walk through it. So it was wonderful. Adam was wonderful. The Ida folks were wonderful. And Sirach was just so generous and brilliant. And, we weren't sure how involved he would be. And he was there every class with notes after notes after notes. He brought his books. And was breaking down political connections, comparing the Jem'Hadar's genetic reliance on Ketracel white to the opium trade during the Chinese, and for those who know, my DS9 heads, and if you don't know, you should go find out. But it just making these really brilliant connections to this world, and showing how important it was, as well as bringing obviously so many stories and insights from being on set and getting to hear about how this show that I believe to be really uniquely remarkable in many ways was able to exist and was able to be made. And so I think every week I could not believe that it was real. And sometimes people ask me about it. I was like, did that happen, or was it just a beautiful dream? But it did happen. So that, I think, that entry point of Black studies, of through popular culture, of saying this is something worth studying and engaging with because folks are engaging with it. And it's not something to dismiss or throw away because, it's not academic enough, or because there are, critiques to be made, but instead saying, yes, let's make those critiques and let's find, all of it, and let's pull it all out, and let's use this to have the conversations that need to be had.
For sure. That is, being able to, like you said, hold both things at the same time is so important. And also reflective of our actual reality. Most things aren't, yes, this is right, and no, this is wrong.
Yeah.
So coming off of talking about Deep Space Nine and the entry point of into Black studies, through a popular culture lens, I know that you have an MFA.
Mm-hmm.
So what is it? How does your background as being an artist, how does that influence or impact your work in Black studies?
Yeah, I think it's so important. And, one of my areas of studies is the history of social movements, and specifically the Black Panther Party. And so, studying that time, that's when Black studies was born across the country, and ethnic studies and all of these other, departments, and that they were born out of the community, and they were born out of students and faculty and staff and the community fighting and sitting in and protesting and shutting down until their demands were met. But seeing it, it's growing at the same time the Black arts movement is growing in the community. And so they're so deeply intertwined from the beginning, which again, I think is the way that it should be. To me, art is not just something you do. It's a way of understanding the world. It's its own way of knowing. And so I think it's so important to be able to create those spaces, because it is a very different emotional engagement that folks, have with art versus just reading a text. And again, it's a yes and, not a either or. But I think, always trying to create spaces for the students I work with to experience whatever we're talking about on as many levels as possible, because that's how the folks who lived it experienced it. And so to know them, you have to know it on the multiplicity of levels.
Yeah. The experiencing on multiple levels. That's so important. And I think that it can be lost sometimes in the classroom with all of the things that are expected to be done, particularly institutionally all of the demands and things that are placed on individuals and on students.
Yeah.
So being able to engage on multiple levels, like you said, it's a different type of engagement, and
Mhm.
it can facilitate a different type of learning
Yeah.
and
Abs
understanding.
Yeah. Like at the prison program that we're teaching, we taught a class in winter, myself and two other professors at Black Study or at Portland State, called Memory and Place in Black Portland. And so it was really looking at historic Black placemaking in Portland, but in the context of gentrification, of incarceration, of over policing, of abolition. And so the students, the vast majority of whom are from the historic Black community, which again, that's not unique. Obviously, we know that that's where our population has shifted during gentrification as well. We've been pushed out of our communities in many directions, and one of them is into prisons. And so getting to hear their expertise, their experience, especially on things I've studied, since I was a teenager, I have no way of knowing it in that way. And so them sharing their expertise was just so powerful and moving. And the project was, an artistic project as well, where they explored that through photo voice, through poems, and through narratives. And we're actually going to release a book of all of that with all the students' wonderful work this fall. And I think, it was powerful because up until that point, the students, we'd had some creative projects, but we hadn't engaged in that way of really a whole term of this is how we are learning through these lenses. And I know some of the students were very hesitant and they were like, I'm not a poet. I can't do this. I'm not a good writer. And it was just really beautiful to see all of them come into themselves and to find their literary voice and to find their, belief in their own experiences and expertise. And so I cannot wait until I get to enter in and bring their books and be like, also, can y'all sign my book? But so I feel like that experience was just really reinforced for me the importance of studying through art, but also of knowing through art.
That's great. And I am looking forward to when that comes out so I can order my copy as well, because I think that it is a wonderful example of that multiple levels of knowing and of what Black studies can do when people are allowed to engage in it in ways that are meaningful for them.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So, don't want to take up too much of your time. I know that it is Friday. So, 2 more questions. One, so what interests you most about the past of Black studies in both critical and excited senses?
Oh. Have you asked that to other people before?
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the answers there?
Well, a lot of people so learning from what's happened, right? So all of the things, like when I talked to Jakia, who's also at Stanford, right, with us, she talked about how Black studies is a blueprint for everything. Like if we want to understand what's happening now, we just need to go look at Black studies. There are knowledges and intelligences that exist that have addressed climate change and have addressed overpolicing, that have addressed the crisis in the educational system. And we need to look back at our history to be able to really think about where we can go moving forward. And the fact that that history is there and people are starting to engage with it more, whether it's out of necessity or desperation, is a really important piece of it. And then people have talked about the connections between community and the academy, the ways in which Black studies came to the academy because of student protest and because of the need to rectify the narrative about Black people and about what's academic, right? Like understanding that like we have intelligence and knowledge and academic knowledge as well, and kind of putting that together and letting the students see themselves in the courses and learn from not just, you know, old dead white men. Yeah, those are some of the things that stick out to me about what's been said before.
Well, that is a beautiful summary. And I'm like, yeah, ditto. I'm like, whatever Pierre says, I agree with that. Yeah, I mean, I think, I do think all of those things. And, you know, I think one of the things is, as someone who is both a historian and a futurist, again, to me, I focus a lot and am very obsessed with the notion of time travel and nonlinear time, specifically Blackness as time travel and nonlinear time, because, you know, for us culturally, the past is not past and the future is not unreachable, right? They're both living right now. And I think that framework is the framework that has allowed Black communities to be so visionary in the face of so much brutality, is, you know, challenging that notion that, oh, well, you're never going to get to see the future and the past is lost to you. And folks being like, nope, they're right. They're both right here and we're all working against you. So get ready. You know, so I think to me, that is part of the importance of that, is that looking in the past, we can begin to see what we want in the future, and the ways that we already have what we need. I think that we often are told by the system that we don't have the information we need. I think folks who are proposing alternate systems of, you know, dealing with harm or healing or education or any alternative system, we're told, oh, it's, you know, you just came up with this. You just thought of this. You don't have a real plan. And it's through looking back at history, we're like, oh, we have a million well-developed real plans that if you had implemented at any point, we'd be at a better place. But, you know, obviously not just taking something from the 60s and implementing it, but really seeing the ways that there are pieces, there are so many, they're not just seeds, they're like seedlings that we can just kind of bring and can pollinate and can, you know, help us grow, you know, those dreams of our ancestors while we're growing it in our own soil, with our own light, in a way that will grow differently, but it will also grow, you know, connected.
So, using that seedling metaphor, right? What are the seedlings that you are excited to see pollinate and bloom in the future of Black studies?
Oh, well, I mean, you know, given the work that I'm doing around prison education, and I do want to throw this out for any academics out there, you know, the federal government has reinstated Pell grants, financial aid for incarcerated people. And so part of the reason the vast majority of education programs in the prison died is because in the 90s that was changed, that folks in prison could not get financial assistance. And as anybody who's gone to college or been near a college knows, it is expensive and getting more expensive every second. And so this is really an incredible opportunity. And I feel so excited about the possibilities. Again, you know, teaching in the prison I have had so many incredible teaching experiences. It has been the singularly most gratifying experience because, again, the students are so committed. I mean, I have to step up my game because they will read everything and they'll be like, okay, but on page 27, it contradicts what we read last week. So I'm trying to figure out. And I'm like, wait, where? What? Huh? I'm like, you know, nobody's here skimming. No one's like, you know, bad things happen, which, you know, I'm like, I get it. things happen. Everybody doesn't always do the readings, but it is such an incredible opportunity as an educator to have students who are so hungry for educational opportunities and experiences, for knowledge. And the students, I have one student, he does every piece of extra credit. First, I'm like, you don't have to do any extra credit because you're already always getting 100% because you're footnoting your reading journals. Like you're going above and beyond already. And he's like, I want to make sure that I'm getting everything I can out of this opportunity. So I'm going to do everything that is available to me to the fullest of my ability. And as an educator, I'm like, then I'm going to try and be the best educator I can be to rise to that challenge of providing you with things that are worth that level of commitment and energy. So I would just throw that out to folks that, especially in Black studies, this is the time, this is an opportunity for our departments and for other departments and universities to be able to enter into these places that we're supposed to be locked out of and really be able to have that kind of engagement with parts of our community that have been stolen from us.
Well, that is a wonderful reminder and call. So thank you for the information and for really speaking to how powerful and important this opportunity is. So thank you. And thank you for your time.
Oh, thanks.
Lovely to talk with you as always.
Oh, it's always great to see you. I'm like, yeah. I was like, of course, Ashley, whatever is needed. Sign me up. Tell me about it later. So.
Well, I so appreciate it. And I hope that you have a wonderful rest of your Friday and a relaxing, or at least restful, weekend.
Thank you. Speaking of, tomorrow's the last day of summer classes. So I'm getting to go into the prison. I haven't been teaching this summer. We have another professor teaching who's doing a fantastic job. But the students are going to be doing plays based on the psychology of race, which they've been studying. And I'm like, oh, I cannot wait. This is going to be amazing. So I will have a great weekend.
Talk to you later.
Yeah, talk to you later. Thanks so much.
Bye.